There will be no weeping allowed. A few years ago, I inherited a garden. When my mom died, I moved in to look after my dad, and I got to take over my mother's garden. And it's really the first and only time I have grown a garden. But every year about this time when it comes to harvest time, I think back on the joy I got from harvesting and reaping what my mother had sown and what I worked on a little bit. I'm not a very experienced gardener, so my broccoli was really quite interesting. It had kind of little heads on it, and I was waiting for, those great big crowns like you get in the supermarket. And so I didn't put these little heads, and then all of a sudden the broccoli bolted, and it was this tall, and it was all spindly. And I said to myself, life's a bit like that, isn't it? While you're waiting for it to get the big, gorgeous, beautiful stuff, sometimes you can lose out on those nice little treats that could have been just a little more soulful. And I thought at the time when we were kids, I grew up in Toronto, which is far away from the fruit fields of the Okanagan. I think the only fruit we ever got was apples and plums. And we didn't have the budget for exotic fruits, so we got bushel baskets of apples. Yes? Anybody remember having bushel baskets? Or the 6-quart baskets, they were about this big with a handle over them. And so you had lots of apples in the house. Well, because my family had a poverty consciousness, we were required to eat the bruised apples first. Because there was always a couple of bruised apples in the basket, right? So we had to eat those before they went bad. But the thing, while we were eating those bruised apples, other apples were starting to get bruised, right? So we were always playing catch up with the apples. And we never got to eat a nice, fresh, crisp apple. And I said to myself, life's a bit like that. Do you ever spend the time cleaning up the stuff that's not quite so good and not giving yourself the best? You can always make applesauce, right? With those bruised ones, and go for the gusto. Have those nice crisp apples. I planted peas in my garden, and I planted snow peas, and I planted shelling peas, and I planted them together. And they grew together, and I got confused as to which was which, and I think they did too. And then I'd look at a pea, and it was pretty small, and I'd say, now is that a snow pea ready to be picked? But I'd leave it a little long, and then the shells would get tough. They were too tough to be snow peas, but the peas weren't big enough to be shelling peas. And I said to myself, life's a little like that sometimes, isn't it? Do you ever start trying to be somebody you're not? I had a friend in school, her name was Joan Dale. I spent 4 years in high school trying to be Joan Dale. Because she did that, she was homecoming queen, she was head cheerleader, she had scholarship, eyelashes out to here. But I would never be a good Joan Dale, but trying to be Joan Dale kept me from being the best me that I could be. Ever do that? Pickling cucumbers. I was going to be Susie Homemaker. I was going to have jars and jars and jars of bread and butter pickles. I've got 4 cucumbers this year. So I said, what do? Do I make 1 jar of pickling cucumbers, or do I just chuck it and chalk it up to experience? And I said to myself, life's a little like that, isn't it? When we don't get all of what we want, we have choices. We have choices. We can, make the best of the little bit. We can chalk it up to experience. Or we can do what most of us do, is bitch about it, right? Complain about it. Yeah, didn't get what I wanted. Lettuce. I was good with the lettuce, because what I discovered is you don't have to harvest those heads of lettuce. You just take the scissors out and go out and pick out the outside leaves every day for the salad you want, and that lettuce keeps growing more leaves. Spinach and chard do the same thing. It's like, holy cow. By the end of the summer, I had more lettuce than I started with. And I said to myself, isn't life a little bit like that? Why do we hoard? Why do we take the whole head of lettuce when all we need? When we have confidence and trust that there's always going to be what we need. We don't have to do that. We don't have to save up anything. We don't have to hoard anything. What a great lesson that was for me. Now, rhubarb. I don't much care for rhubarb. It's a little bitter for me. But, of course, we all know that if we stew rhubarb up with some strawberries or blueberries, or we bake it in a pie and put ice cream on it, it becomes something very special, right? I said to myself, life's a bit like that. You know, you can get a little bitter sometimes, but it's always better with ice cream. What else did I have? Tomatoes. I did really, really, really well with tomatoes. I had boxes and boxes and boxes of tomatoes. Only trouble, this was in Victoria. Got to be this time of year, started to get some frost in the morning, started to get some rain. I knew these tomatoes were not going to ripen anymore, and they were all green. Well, you can only eat so many fried green tomatoes, right? But Helen Chestnut, who writes a gardening column in Victoria, told me that if I take the tomatoes in, wash them gently, lay them in a warm place, they would continue to ripen. And I said to myself, I wonder if life's like that. What if I clean myself up and take myself to a warm place where I can And then actually I did. I had a friend who had a wonderful recipe for green tomato mincemeat. Man, that turned out really well too. Potatoes. What a gift potatoes are. They're so versatile and they're so cheap and you can do anything with them. And I said to myself, life's like that. You know, no matter how boring it is, you can always cook it up in a new way and it gets fun again. And potatoes are so abundant. When you dig up the garden next year, you find last year's tomatoes still around there. And I said to myself, life's a little like that. If you grub in there a little bit, you can always find more. You ever just do this in your garden? Pick out all sorts of extra potatoes. And I understand that if you leave carrots in the ground past the first frost, they sweeten up. And I said to myself, life's a bit like that. You know, that being in the ground through the first frost, that's kind of a metaphor for the struggles we have in the life, the cold times, the hard times. And don't they sweeten us up? Yeah? Anybody a lot sweeter because of the hard times you've gone through? For sure. So when I planted all those seeds in my garden, I had hope, you know, that the following fall I would be able to harvest all that stuff. And so what I want to do now is switch the focus of this talk and look at this thing called hope. Hope. Hope is one of those words that in a way kind of gets a bit of a bad rap. You can look at it either way. You say you give people hope, that's positive. But in a way, hope's kind of like, you know, somebody who talked about religion being as the opiate of the masses. There's a tendency to think of hope that way too, to lump it in there with wishful thinking, you know, and almost a downside to hope. Ernest Holmes says, where is it? He calls it a subtle illusion. He says some people begin their treatment, their prayer, by saying, I know that the principle of intelligence within me will direct me, etc. But then they complete it with the thought, well, I certainly hope it does. And that kind of takes away from it. He says, hope is good, it is better than despair, but it is a subtle illusion and is an unconscious compromise and has no part in an effective mental treatment. However, I like reading the dictionary, and the dictionary tells us a little bit different definition of hope. It says, to hope is to wish for something with expectation, to have confidence, trust, to expect and desire. A wish or desire accompanied by some confident expectation. So that's not quite wishful thinking, isn't it? So if I hope for something with a confident expectation, so when somebody says to you, I hope you're feeling better, they're actually putting an affirmation out there. I have confident expectation that I know you're feeling better. And that's what our spiritual mind treatment does. It's hope. It's putting a hope out there. We confidently expect that what we treat for will show up. We have confidence because we have this technique, right? We've come to class and we learned how to do it. We learned how to apply it in our life. We have this hope that we can confidently expect that what we speak our word will show up in material form. So I'm not an experienced gardener, so I was hoping my vegetables. Pam doesn't hope. Marie doesn't hope. They plant their garden, they know, right? You don't hope for anything. You know abundance is coming to you. Because it's been some experience for you. And it's the same for us when we've had some experience with successes with our spiritual mind treatment. when we've learned the technique for consciously creating our reality, we get a little success and then we have become even more confident and more confident. Pretty soon we're like Pam and Marie. We plant those seeds of our expectations. So hope is not as, granted it's not as definite as knowing, but it's where most of us start, right? We start, we experiment, we take this class. They say, okay, you do this 5-step spiritual mind treatment, you'll see miracles. So we try it. And we get a little success. And then we get another little success. And we gradually build into knowingness. Jeremy Taylor said, without hope, it is impossible to pray. But hope makes our prayers reasonable, passionate, and religious. If we do not have an understanding of how and why spiritual mind treatment works, we wouldn't have that confident expectation, would we? But we do know why it works. We do know that the universe responds to what we think into it. That's why it works. And so when we consciously determine what we're thinking, we can direct the universe. We can actually direct creation. And when we get that in our minds, how big that is, then we have more and more confidence in our expectation. That prayer is a reliable scientific process that we do. Confident expectation. Martin Luther said that everything that is done in the world is done by hope. And that's true, isn't it? We know that everything that's happened, everything that's been invented, everything that's been designed, had to be a thought first in somebody's mind, or it couldn't show up. So hope or concern. I think it's either hope or anxiety is the thought that we have in our head. If it's a positive, I hope I'm going to have a garden, or it's, oh God, I hope I'm going to have a garden. You know, which way are you coming from? Either way, equally powerful. You know, we heard about the power of positive thinking, and we talk about that a lot. Our negative thinking is just as powerful. Those negative seeds that we plant grow just as the positive ones do. Equally creative. Every thought is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Every thought. Matthew Pryor said, hope is but the dream of those that wake. So it's still dreaming, but it's focused. It's like we know we're dreaming now. I'm choosing to have this dream of hope. So another word, I'm going to switch over because I love reading the dictionary, is harvest. And the dictionary says, the crop that ripens or is gathered in season, but also, okay. You've been there that whole time? Harvest is the result